Chapter 095. Prayer. Veyers was a frustrating part of the time loop mystery for Zorian. The fact that he had been deliberately erased from Zack's mind and that he started each restart dead made him a strong suspect for the real identity of Red Robe. However, that raised the question of how Veyers had managed to become a permanent looper. It couldn't have been through the method Zorian had used. Everything he and Zack knew indicated that had been pure luck, and that deliberately replicating it would be both hard and dangerous. Zorian's conversation with Panicseth had fully convinced Zorian that Zack was the original controller of the loop, so Red Robe must have come later. That meant he had probably become a looper through the temporary marker given by the Imperial Crown, which meant that he had only had 6 months to figure out a way to permanently join the time loop. Did Veyers really possess the skills necessary to pull that off? He was just an inexperienced teenager. He had a crippling condition that made his magic and personality unstable. He was not considered a social genius or a magic prodigy, even before his botched ignition ritual. There was no way he could have developed his magic sufficiently to pull it off in mere 6 months, and organizing a group that could have done so in his stead would have taken considerable amount of social shrewdness. Not to mention that Veyers would have had to do all this while keeping Zack in the dark about everything. Zack wasn't very paranoid and was probably even less so in the past, but that couldn't have been easy regardless. Still, Zorian could see how it could have worked. Perhaps Zack had really come to like Veyers for some reason and had done most of the work himself. Perhaps he had brought the other boy into the time loop again and again, figured out a way to stabilize his magic, and helped him advance his skills in the fastest and most convenient manner possible. Perhaps there had even been a time when Zack had gone through the trouble of recruiting Quata Kickle and other soul magic experts in order to figure out a way to crack the secrets of the temporary marker, so that he could bring his best pal Veyers permanently into the time loop. In order to be Red Robe, Veyers didn't have to be a resourceful mastermind that achieved what he and Zack could not in just 6 months. He could have simply been an opportunistic, heartless traitor who stabbed Zack in the back after his fellow time looper had given him everything he could. It was all pure speculation, of course. Concrete answers about Veyers were basically impossible to find inside the time loop. Veyers himself obviously couldn't be questioned. People he was related to knew nothing useful. Zack did not remember anything about the boy, and Red Robe had left the time loop. If there were answers regarding Veyers, they would have to wait until Zorian had left the time loop. Once he had done so, however, things remained stubbornly unclear. He found out that Red Robe had gone through the trouble of evacuating Veyers and his lawyer friend immediately after crossing over to the real world. That greatly increased the chance that Veyers really was Red Robe in his mind. However, he was then informed by Zack that in the restarts following his departure, both Zorian and Silverlake were very much alive. Devoid of any memories of the time loop, but alive. This was very much unlike Veyers, who was dead and soulless at the beginning of every restart. Didn't that basically confirm that Veyers was knocked out of the time loop by the Imperial Dagger and couldn't possibly be Red Robe? Now all of those questions had a chance of being answered because Veyers was finally in front of them. They didn't even have to search for him. He had just shown up in class, alone and defenseless. Zorian had to admit he had been caught completely off guard by the boy's arrival. If this was Red Robe, why would he do this? If this was the original Veyers, why would Red Robe allow this? Why, for the love of all that was holy, had Veyers suddenly come here? Based on the reactions of everyone around him, Zorian could see that no one, not even Ilsa, knew the answer to that question. After briefly staring down everyone, Veyers picked an empty spot not far from Zorian and Briam and sat down. He ignored everyone staring at him and started to unpack his books and writing supplies out of his bag, slamming them loudly on the table in front of them in a clear attempt to provoke some kind of reaction. "Mr. Boranova, what do you think you are doing here?" Ilsa finally asked him. "What?" he challenged. "I'm attending the class I paid for. Is there a problem?" "You are no longer a student of this institution," Ilsa told him, taking a deep breath and clearly suppressing a sigh. Her voice was tinged with annoyance and she gripped the teaching rod in her hand a little more tightly in her grip. "You know this." "I know no such thing," Veyers said immediately, shaking his head and making exaggerated faces at her. "My tuition has been paid in full. I passed my first circle certification with flying colors, and I received no notification about any changes in my attendance status. How can I no longer be a student?" "You attacked people on your disciplinary hearing, Mr. Boranova," Ilsa told him. "As a result, you were expelled from the academy. You know this, I'm sure of this. Why are you doing this to yourself? That's a lie. I didn't attack anyone, Varys said stubbornly. I lost control over my magic and burned down some furniture. It happens sometimes. You know this, I'm sure of this. Your institution had no problem taking my money back in the past, even though they were warned this would be the case. I was assured that so long no one was hurt and I paid for any damages, I would be allowed to attend. You have no right to expel me over that incident. It wasn't me who made the decision, so I don't understand why you're telling me this, Ylsa told him. She didn't look particularly sympathetic towards him, and probably didn't really believe him much either. Make a complaint to the Academy's legal department if you feel you were wronged. Well, I will, Varys exclaimed. And in the meantime I will continue to attend the classes I paid for. Zorian looked in disbelief as Varys continued to argue with Ylsa over his expulsion and right to attend classes. He found the entire situation surreal. It was obvious this Varys wasn't Red Robe. He paid no special attention to Zack and Zorian, his mind and soul were largely unprotected, and his awful confrontational attitude was exactly as Zorian remembered it. This was the original Varys, untouched by the time loop, for better or for worse. Why would Red Robe allow this? He had specifically evacuated the original Varys from his friend's house at the start of the restart. Zorian had fully expected Varys to have been taken to some secure place, far away from danger. Why would Red Robe go through all that trouble and then just let the original Varys come to class and make a scene? It didn't make sense. Zorian could try to search for answers by digging around in Varys' mind. But the boy did have some basic protection from mental tampering. He was wearing a pendant with a big green marble embedded in it. It was projecting a mental shield around Varys' mind and would start screeching and glowing if that barrier was broken or tampered with. Zorian had seen such pendants before. The shield they created was easy to break, but the alarm on them was sufficiently trigger-happy that he couldn't bypass it quietly. He would cause a scene almost as big as Varys if he mentally assaulted him in the middle of class while he was wearing that. Not that this would stop Zorian for long, of course. He just needed to pick the right moment and everything would be over in seconds. The only thing that worried him was that he suspected Varys to be some kind of trap by Red Robe. Did the boy have some kind of trap placed inside his mind, waiting to be triggered by a careless mind reader? Was there someone spying on Varys, ready to report them to the authorities when they were caught attacking him? He started covertly scouting their surroundings while watching Varys get increasingly agitated as he argued with Ylsa. The rest of the classmates were also starting to get restless, muttering to each other in increasingly loud voices. Few of them saw Varys' actions in positive light, which no doubt made him even angrier. Must give me back the money I paid for this, Varys shouted, banging his hand against the desk for emphasis. It's disgusting and shameless in the extreme that you're trying to claim my tuition after expelling me. How brazen and corrupt can you be? I could say the same thing about you, Mr. Boranova. How shameless do you have to be to make this kind of display here and disrupt my class like this? Ylsa said in a tone that was calmer and more dignified than Varys, but still noticeably heated. If you have complaints about money, go speak to the headmaster or the accounting office. I am not in charge of handling student money and I'm not familiar with the particulars of your case. All I know is that you have been expelled and that you are wasting everyone's time here with your antics. Please leave. Make me, Varys challenged. His orange eyes light up with a fiery glow and a notebook he placed on the table ignited and burst into flames. Evidently Red Robe didn't bother to fix his botched ignition ritual. Make me, he repeated angrily. I'll burn this whole place down, I swear. Varys, Ylsa said, pushing her glasses upwards to massage her eyes in frustration. This was the first time she was calling him by his first name. Why must you do this? Don't you realize you're just shooting yourself in the foot? If you really plan to take the Academy to court over this, behaving like this will only give them more ammunition. Trogmar, no. Briam suddenly yelled. It was useless. Trogmar, his fire drake familiar, had been completely infuriated by Varys for some time already. Now that Varys had lost control over his powers and started burning things, the fire drake decided it was done passively waiting for this threat to come to him and his master. With a fearsome battle screech, the fire drake ripped itself away from Briam's desperate attempts to hold him back and leapt over the tables. It crashed into Varys' table, scattering books in all directions, and hissed menacingly at the orange-eyed boy. Swearing loudly, Veyers hurriedly pushed himself from his desk, fell on his ass in his hurry to evade the fire drake, and then erupted into a short-ranged fireball centered on himself. Undaunted, the fire drake took the flames head-on and added his own fire breath to the blaze. The entire class started screaming and scrambled to get out of the classroom and away from the burning battlefield. While Zack and Zorian remained calm and collected. They each picked one end of the classroom and subtly protected their classmates from harm by channeling the flames away from them through invisible force fields and chilling spells. Aside from them, only Brahim and Ilsa did not try to escape the place. Brahim was desperately trying to rein his familiar in and drag him off from the fight, while Ilsa did her best to keep the fire contained and tried to restrain Veyers and the fire drake in order to stop the fight. Ilsa would have normally realized that Zack and Zorian had something to do with the surprising tendency of the flames to swerve away from the students or lose power before they reached them, but Zorian was using some light mind magic to draw her attention away from that. It wasn't particularly difficult, since there was a big eye-catching battle in progress, and that attracted most of her attention anyway. Of course, the fact Veyers and Brahim's fire drake were throwing fire everywhere and that everyone was making a huge racket in their attempt to vacate the classroom meant this was a perfect opportunity for Zorian to covertly disable Veyers' pendant and invade his mind. He shared a silent look with Zack, who simply nodded at him. In the next moment they both struck. Zack wrapped the pendant in an illusion that made it appear inert no matter what was happening, while Zorian pierced the mental barrier it created and started reading Veyers' mind and subverting his will. Eventually, Ilsa managed to separate the two combatants, aided in no small part by Zorian mentally forcing them both to back down. Brahim immediately dragged off his familiar away from Veyers, calming the fire drake down and inspecting him to see if he got hurt in the fight. As for Veyers, he simply collapsed unconscious all of a sudden. Zorian found it easier to memory search people when they were not mentally struggling against him all the time, and he had already gotten everything he could have out of his surface thoughts alone. He was just about to convince Ilsa to let him and Zack carry Veyers off to a hospital or something when she suddenly spoke up. Have you been here all this time?" she asked, glancing towards Zack and Zorian. "Yes," Zack confirmed. "We know some basic spells, so we stayed to see if we could help somehow." "A bit reckless but commendable," Ilsa said. "Unfortunately, no good deed goes unpunished in this world. I need some uninvolved witnesses when I speak to the headmaster about this. And since you were here from start to finish, you fit the bill perfectly. You'll be coming with me after I clean up the classroom." Zack and Zorian shared a look before lightly shrugging at each other. This was perfect, really. They got to stay close to Veyers for quite a while, giving Zorian plenty of time to rummage through his memories, and they didn't even have to make up some contrived excuse to do so. "Okay," Zorian agreed easily. Ilsa nodded at them, pleased they had no intention of trying to weasel out of it. She conjured a disc of force and levitated Veyers on top of it, before turning towards Brahim. Zack took the chance when her back was turned and telekinetically crushed Veyers' mind shield pendant into scrap. It gave off one final ear-piercing screech and a flash of light, invisible and inaudible through the illusion Zack placed on it earlier, and then went completely inert. "Brahim, you and your familiar are coming along as well," she told him. "This teacher, I don't know what came into him." "I," stammered Brahim, clutching the fire drake in his arms tighter to his chest. Trogmar had largely calmed down at this point, increasingly aware that his master was not happy with what he had done. "I understand," Ilsa sighed. "I don't think you will receive a serious punishment, especially since Veyers is the other involved party. You really need to keep a better grip on your fire drake, however. Veyers started things, but this isn't a good look for you either." "Yes," he nodded quickly. "Let's go then," Ilsa said, gesturing towards the door. She strode off towards the headmaster's office, followed by Zack and Zorian, Brahim and his fire drake, and an unconscious Veyers on a floating ectoplasmic disc. She found Akoja and a number of other students waiting outside the classroom door, curious to see the resolution of the incident, and promptly recruited some of them as additional witnesses before telling the rest the class was cancelled for the day and that they were free to go. Zorian handed off his body to the mind of a distant simulacrum before focusing all of his attention on the memories locked inside Veyers' head. "Break. So, were you the one who pushed Brahim's drake into doing that?" Zack asked him later. "No, that was completely spontaneous," Zorian said, shaking his head. "I had nothing to do with it." The questioning had lasted for hours and Veyers had managed to wake up by the end of it. Without any memories of mental tampering, of course. He then yelled out all sorts of threats to everyone in the room and stormed off angrily, thus marking the end of that particular meeting. Zach and Zorian decided to retreat to Novita Mansion to discuss what happened. "What did you get out of Veyers then?" Zach asked. "You don't look very excited, so I'm guessing very little." "Sort of," Zorian admitted. "As you might expect, he doesn't know who Red Robe is. He doesn't even remember what happened when he and his lawyer friend were evacuated at the beginning of the restart. That part of his memories was thoroughly erased and I can't find out anything about it." "Of course," Zach scoffed. "If he knew Red Robe's plans or identity, no way would Red Robe send him to class like this. What was even the point of that, I wonder? This was way too petty to be a legitimate part of Red Robe's master plan." "I don't think this is something Red Robe thought up," Zorian said. "From what I could glean in Veyers' mind, our former classmate has had this on his mind for quite a while. Long before this month began." "Wait, so this is his idea?" Zach said incredulously. "If you could remember Veyers, you'd know this is exactly the sort of thing he would do," Zorian said. "He thought his expulsion was unfair and decided to do something about it. I doubt he saw the situation developing as it did, but he definitely came to class with the goal of making a stand against the academy and drawing attention to his case." "So this had nothing to do with Red Robe?" Zach asked, frowning. "No, this was just Veyers being Veyers," Zorian answered. "In fact, I suspect this was the reason Red Robe wiped out your memories of Veyers when he took a sledgehammer to your mind." "What?" asked Zach, giving him a shocked look. "What do you mean? I don't understand." "Veyers probably did this in every single restart while he was still alive," Zorian said. "Come to our first class and start a fight with Bryam's Fire Drake, you mean?" Zach asked. "Yeah," Zorian nodded. "We always wondered why Red Robe bothered to erase your memories of Veyers, considering you wouldn't normally even interact with him. But if he normally showed up for class to make a scene, it would be very strange for him to suddenly stop coming," Zach said, eyes lighting up in realization. "If Red Robe is Veyers, he probably didn't want to go through this at the beginning of every restart just to keep up a charade. It's a waste of time and he probably cringed inside at the thought of what an idiot he used to be. However, him being absent from class would immediately tip me off that something is wrong with him, unless I no longer remember him. That still begs the question, though, why would Red Robe allow Veyers to expose himself like this after going to the trouble of saving him at the start of the month?" Zorian asked. "We didn't kill him," Zach pointed out. "Yes, but how would Red Robe know for sure what we would or would not do to Veyers?" Zorian countered. "He was playing with Veyers' life by letting him come here. Plus, even if he scrubbed his memories clean of any sensitive information, he can't know for sure that he didn't leave anything of importance behind. It's just a pointless risk. If I was in Red Robe's place, I'd never let this happen. I'd trap Veyers in a dungeon and sedate him if I had to. Does Red Robe even care about the welfare of the original Veyers?" "I don't know if that logic really holds," Zach told him dubiously. "You also brought your little sister here even though you knew this placed her in greater danger. You cared more about fulfilling her wishes than making her perfectly safe." Zorian made a sour face at that. He hated when Zach was right like that. "Anyway, even if Red Robe doesn't know what you would do, he does know me, well, presumably. I would never just kill Veyers for no reason, even if he does have some tenuous connection to our opponent. None of this is his fault, really. Does he even have any connection to the cult or the Abasins?" "No, that's all Jornak," said Zorian, shaking his head. "And Veyers doesn't know about that either." "Right. So there is no reason for us to go after original Veyers," Zach said. "He's just a dumb kid with no way to threaten us. Killing him would be really petty. We didn't even kill the original Silver Lake, even though she could be a real headache if Time Looper Silver Lake manages to recruit her to her side." "I guess," Zorian said, not really convinced yet. "I still think it's very weird. I thought him showing up was maybe some kind of trap, but it doesn't appear this is correct. I put a tracker on him before he left," Zach said. "If he goes back to Red Robe." "He won't," Zorian said, shaking his head. "This is Red Robe cutting him off and letting him sink or swim on his own. He'll go either back to his family or maybe to his lawyer friend. Assuming Jornak goes back to his home, that is. They talked about the issue for some time before Zorian decided it was time to leave. Sadly, another thing cropped up before he had a chance to set off. Placed on the doorstep of Novita Mansion was a simple white envelope addressed to Zach Novita and Zorian Kaczynski. After thoroughly analyzing it for traps, the two of them opened it and found a letter waiting for them inside. It was just a sheet of normal non-magical paper with a few words scrawled on it in fancy formal handwriting. "Thank you for showing mercy. Perhaps we can come to an agreement after all. Let's talk. You can pick a time and place for the meeting. You know how to contact me." There was no return address, signature, or name of the sender on the letter. But it was obvious who sent it. Just as it was obvious that they couldn't refuse the invitation. Break. It was already late in the evening and Zorian was slowly making his way to Amaya's place. He wasn't in a hurry. His thoughts were still stuck on the letter they received back at the Novita estate. A meeting with Red Robe. What could the third time traveler want to talk to them about? As far as Zorian could see, they were completely and unavoidably opposed to each other. There was very little they could agree upon, and they couldn't really trust each other to stick to any such agreement anyway. Especially since Zorian strongly suspected Red Robe got into the time loop by backstabbing Zack. A person like that couldn't be trusted at all. As he was passing through one of the many Scioria city parks, he suddenly stopped and turned towards the small fountain in the center. He had detected a familiar mental and soul signature in that direction. There was a young woman sitting there on the edge of the fountain. She was roughly 20 years of age, tall and beautiful, with long black hair and a feminine figure. The sort of beauty that made men turn around as they walked and remained stuck in their head for a while. Also, she was completely unfamiliar to Zorian. He had never seen this woman before in his entire life, he was sure. And yet, she grinned at him cheekily, patting at the spot next to her as if inviting him to join her. Some of the men around him cast him dark, jealous glances in response. Zorian ignored the invitation for a second, directing his attention to the roof of a nearby building, where a large raven was inconspicuously sitting and observing the scene below. Zorian cautiously approached the smiling woman, his expression darkening. When he was closer to her, he stopped. He could feel a ward field spring into existence around them, but he did nothing to stop it. He could immediately recognize it as a basic privacy ward, meant to stop people from listening in on them. "Hello, Silver Lake," he said. "You look much better than you did the last time we talked." "Haha, you flatterer," she told him. "I feel better. My mind is clearer, my bones do not ache, and I no longer get tired as easily. Being young again is everything I hoped for and more." "Is this really what you looked like when you were younger, though?" Zorian asked her curiously. "I have no idea," she said with a shrug. "I don't have any paintings of myself when I was younger, but I do remember being quite a looker in my younger days. Anyone who could legitimately call me out on this little bit of vanity is long dead, so who cares?" "Little bit of vanity," Zorian repeated quietly. "Yes, just a little bit," Silverlake said, pretending to adjust her hair while smiling at him brightly. "You know, you should try not to frown so much. It will give you wrinkles." "You were surprisingly quiet so far," Zorian pointed out. "What's up with that?" You know, there's always something," she said dismissively. "An emergency here, an emergency there, and you suddenly lost 2 days with nothing to show for it. It's frustrating, but that's life." "Indeed," said Zorian, glancing to the nearby roof where the raven was intently watching them. "I see you got yourself a new familiar. What happened to your old raven?" Silverlake stopped smiling at him. "I guess Panic Seth couldn't get him out of the time loop along with you," Zorian continued. "That must have hurt. I heard it's not healthy to lose a soul-bonded familiar like that. Especially for witches like yourself. Witches are known for having well-developed familiar-related magic, which probably translates into an even deeper link to their partner animals. Your soul must have suffered considerable damage when you were incarnated into that pretty new body of yours." "You know, you have been unusually passive yourself," Silverlake remarked. "I would have expected you to move faster and bolder than this. I'm guessing your arrival here has not been very smooth either." "I guess you could say that," Zorian said. "I'm mostly recovered by now, though." "What a coincidence." "So am I," said Silverlake with a happy laugh. She suddenly gave him a serious look. "Besides, we both know it isn't my spell work that really worries you and your friend. It's the knowledge I possess about your skills, resources, contacts, and tactics." Zorian frowned at her weird emphasis on the word friend, but in the end decided not to pursue that for the moment. "Why are you here, Silver Lake?" Zorian asked her seriously. "Aren't you afraid I'll kill you on the spot?" "Haha. What, you'll attack me in the middle of a crowded park?" she said, sweeping her hand to point at the various people milling around them. Some of them were even curiously observing them, unable to hear what they're saying but clearly speculating what two mages like them could be discussing like this. "It might be worth it to take down a traitor like you," Zorian told her. "Huh. You know, I never told Red Robe most of the information about you that I possess," she said. Zorian frowned at the statement. "If I die here, however, the dead man's switch I made will activate and everything I know will fall into his lap," she said with a triumphant grin. She crossed her legs one over another and threw her head back in a self-satisfied pose. "Killing me here would be a very serious mistake. You're a smart, sensible kid, so I know you'll make the right choice." After a few seconds, Zorian decided she was probably telling the truth. The way Red Robe had been behaving these past few days, it was obvious he lacked the sort of deep knowledge about Zack and Zorian that he should have had if Silver Lake had simply spilled everything immediately. "All right. I guess you have a point there," Zorian admitted. "That still leaves the question of why you came here. You were clearly waiting for me. What do you want?" "What? Not going to thank me for keeping your secrets?" Silver Lake complained. "Whatever your reason for doing that, I'm sure it's purely selfish and aimed squarely on maximizing your gains in this. I'm guessing you were trying to pressure Red Robe into making some sort of concession by not handing all the information over to him immediately, but it ultimately doesn't matter. All that matters is that any benefit we get out of this is purely incidental. What is there to thank you for?" Zorian challenged. "So judgmental," Silver Lake sighed dramatically. "It's because I'm a witch, isn't it? It's always like this. We're only good for making potions and doing people's dirty work, and then it's back to the woods with you." "I don't have time for this," Zorian told her, turning to leave. "I think I'm going to practice my aim on that raven over there and then go home." "There's still time for you to join me, you know?" Silver Lake called out, not a trace of panic or annoyance in her voice. Zorian's back remained turned away from her, but he did turn his head towards her to give her an incredulous look. "I know I sound stupid to say that," she began. "Yeah, you do," Zorian confirmed. "But I really think you should hear me out," she continued. "Remember when we were talking about your friend, and how weird I made the word sound?" "Yes," Zorian confirmed, finally turning around to properly face her. "That was your cue to ask me what I mean by that, silly boy. Must I draw a picture for you or something? Zack is no friend of people like us." "People like us?" Zorian asked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Well, I'm sure you know by now that I have entered into a bit of a contract with the primordial trapped in Cyoria," Silver Lake said. "A death pact to release it by the end of the month or die trying," Zorian said. "Yes, more or less," Silver Lake agreed. "But I'm not the only one who made a death pact. Your friend has also made a death pact." "What? That's bullshit," Zorian said. "Zack could leave the time loop at any time. Why would he need to make a deal with Panicseth?" "Not with the primordial, you numbskull," Silver Lake rolled her eyes at him. "With the angels. He made a death pact with the angels to stop the release of the primordial, while making sure no one could find out about the existence of the time loop. Even if he prevents Panicseth's release, so long as there is even a single person who knows about the time loop by the end of the month, he is going to die. Never mind people who literally originate from the time loop like me and you. Even people you tell about the time loop must either die or have their memory erased, or he will not survive this month." Zorian froze momentarily, his brain stuttering for a second. He fully expected Zack to have some sort of compulsion embedded inside his mind, but this? How do you know this? Zorian asked her quietly. "Did Panicseth tell you this?" "The primordial cannot directly discuss this," Silver Lake said. "He hinted at it, and Red Robe explained the details of it to me later. I don't know how he knows so much about it, but presumably Zack told him that personally while he still remembered." "He could be lying," Zorian pointed out. "Yes, but I don't think he is," Silver Lake said. She gave him a knowing look. "And you probably don't think so either." Zorian said nothing. "Don't think for a second that Zack doesn't know about this either," Silver Lake said. "As someone who is laboring under this sort of contract, I can tell you right now that deals with primordials are not that easy to get out of. I already tried to erase my memories to void the contract and it didn't work. The pact is branded directly into my soul and I am constantly aware of its terms. I can forget the details of how I got it but not the core contents of it. Zack is the same. Remember how he mysteriously knew he had to find a way to beat the invasion? And how he, seemingly foolishly, insisted on trying to take it on all on his lonesome. Zorian still said nothing though his posture slumped a little in response. In retrospect there were a number of things about Zack that fit this idea. His strong insistence that he would never use the temporary looper markers for instance, which always seemed a little strange to his eyes. Until he suddenly changed his mind about that. Or the fact that Zack was clearly a very proactive and social person before he started working with Zorian, but became increasingly passive and even slightly fatalistic once they started working together. I understand what you're getting at, but I think you've badly misjudged the situation, Zorian told Silver Lake. I don't think Zack is out to kill me. And I don't think he would have been out to kill you if you had kept your trust in us and helped us make an exit for ourselves. With your help we could have physically left the loop, laden with knowledge and resources of the time loop. Was it really worth it to give that up just for a chance of a younger body that you would have gotten eventually anyway? In the end, aren't you and Zack the only ones who successfully left that place? Silver Lake challenged, a defiant look on her face. How do you know my presence would have made a difference? You don't. If I stayed, I would have faced extremely low chances of success while working for a person that needs to kill me once we got outside. You can hate me all you want, but I think I made the right choice. Humph. Zorian scoffed, turning back to leave again. Do you seriously think you can trust Zack, knowing all you do now? Silver Lake called out. More than I can trust you, Zorian responded without turning back. The raven on the nearby roof suddenly took flight and disappeared into the horizon. Behind him, Silver Lake shape-shifted into a raven before flying off herself, this time in the opposite direction her familiar went. Well, Zorian actually strongly suspected that the Silver Lake he spoke to was her raven familiar, whereas the raven on the roof had been the real Silver Lake. As much as she tried to pretend she didn't fear him attacking her, he felt she wouldn't risk herself so easily. He sped up his pace, putting some distance between himself and the people that were commenting on the spectacle of an attractive woman suddenly shape-shifting into a bird and flying off, before deliberately entering a dark, isolated alley devoid of people. He kept walking for a while before suddenly stopping and turning around. Are you really going to keep following me all the way to Amaya's place like this? He asked. Only silence greeted him. The alley was dark and still and there was no trace of anyone here beside him. He was stubborn, however, and kept staring at one particular patch of darkness without making any moves. After a full minute of this he was just about to start throwing magic missiles at the spot when the familiar figure of Zack stepped out of the shadows. Took you long enough, Zorian said, relaxing a little. But only a little. You've been following me ever since I left the Novita estate, didn't you? Yes, Zack admitted. Sorry, I don't know. I had a bad feeling and decided to shadow you in secret. I figured that if I was right I get to save the day and if I was just being paranoid you'd never even know. I guess I overestimated my stealth skills a little. So it's true, Zorian said, getting a little angry. Why the hell didn't you tell me? I didn't know the details, Zack said defensively. I didn't know I'd made a deal with angels or even that it was a deal. All I knew was that I have these instincts that tell me things. I can't really talk about them. Can't or won't? Zorian asked. Can't, Zack said. I get tongue-tied whenever I try. And if I read your mind to find out? Zorian asked. I will have to kill you, Zack told him seriously. Oh, Zorian said, swallowing heavily. He didn't think he had any chance against Zack even now. He did have that one trump card that nobody except him knew about, but he needed proper timing to use that and Zack would probably kill him before he could set it up. Good thing I never tried to forcibly read your mind while you were sleeping or something. Yes, very good thing, Zack agreed. A short, uncomfortable silence descended on the scene. You already decided to die at the end of the month, didn't you? Zorian asked him. That's why you had gotten so weird and philosophical lately. I don't intend to murder you once this is all done if that's what you're asking, Zack told him. Silver Lake is just a black-hearted witch with no understanding of things like basic human decency and personal integrity. If I wanted to survive at all costs, I would have gotten rid of you while we were still in the time loop. I can't believe this, Zorian muttered. If I had known about this earlier, maybe we could have. It's divine magic, Zach said. We wouldn't have been able to do shit. Just like Silver Lake can't get rid of her death pact no matter how hard she tries. She's a witch. They're known for being skilled with Hayas. You just know she used every trick in the book to try and get out of the contract, but she still failed. So you're okay with just dying at the end of the month? Zorian asked. Of course I'm not fine with it. Zach said. It's just, if I have to murder my friends to survive, then what's the point of all this power and knowledge? It's not how I want to live my life, okay? Damn it, what the hell was my old self thinking to agree to this? Zach slumped against the nearby alley and lightly thumped his head against the wall. What a horrible, convoluted mess, Zorian thought. As if outmaneuvering Red Robe and Silver Lake was not enough, he now had to figure out how to keep Zach alive when the end of the month came calling. Sometimes he thought the gods were still out there watching him and laughing at his misfortune. Chapter 096. Contract. Before the time loop, Zorian had never frequented the taverns, restaurants and other establishments that were so common in Cyoria. They were a waste of time and money in his opinion, and it wasn't like he had any real friends to go drinking with. It didn't help that he had seen more than one of his classmates succumb to the lure of big city life in his 2 years of education. Rural teenagers like him were especially vulnerable, since they had little to no parental supervision and were unaccustomed to the luxuries and opportunities that existed in Cyoria. Zorian did not want to follow their example, especially after it became obvious that his brother Fortov had fallen into the exact same trap as they had. Amusingly, the time loop had pretty much made him worse in this regard, and he was now familiar with virtually every alcohol-serving establishment in Cyoria. This was mostly Zach's fault. His fellow time traveler loved drinking and despised the static nature of the time loop, which meant he dragged Zorian off to a different place every time they had to meet or talk. The situation was similar at the moment. Once they'd both had a chance to gather their thoughts, Zorian tried to pursue the topic of Zach's angelic contract and the restrictions he was laboring under, only for his fellow time traveler to insist he needed a drink. Zorian himself had never understood the appeal of alcohol, but he also knew it was pointless to argue about things like that with Zach. He just let his friend lead him to a small but lively tavern, where they claimed a table and erected simple privacy wards to ensure some privacy. Still not the safest location for this kind of thing, but it would do. Ah, said Zach in satisfaction, slamming a beer glass on the table before wiping his mouth on his sleeve. Zorian's mouth twitched at the sight, but he said nothing. He was already used to that kind of behavior from Zach, really. I really needed that. So, can I spoil the mood now and dig a little more into this whole angelic contract thing? Zorian asked him, folding his fingers together in a thoughtful gesture. I guess, Zach shrugged. Though I really don't think I'll be able to tell you much. I just need some things confirmed, Zorian said. You said you can't talk about the contract thing, that it physically stops you from saying the words. But would it stop me from picking it up from your thoughts through telepathy? Zach looked uncomfortable for a moment, his eyebrows twisted into a thoughtful frown. It shouldn't, he eventually decided. I mean, we communicated through telepathy quite a few times in the past. You read my surface thoughts more than once and I never felt any urge to attack you. Let's try it. Zorian felt Zach lowering his mental barriers and immediately started looking through his surface thoughts, which appeared to be completely empty. Blank even. Are you thinking about the angel contract at the moment? Zorian asked, frowning. I'm thinking of the mysterious rules that I'm laboring under, Zach told him. If that's really a death pact with the angels like Silver Lake was saying, then yes, I'm thinking about it. Why? I can't read anything from you, Zorian admitted. It's like you have no thoughts at all. It didn't work. No matter what trick or method they used, Zorian could not get anything about a contract from Zach's surface thoughts. It wasn't that he could not read the boy at all. He could interpret Zach's thoughts just fine when he was thinking about mundane things, like how his hand itched or how cute the passing waitress was. But every thought that involved the mysterious rules, as Zach called them, was invisible to Zorian. The effect was both subtle and sophisticated. There was no indication that Zach's thoughts were being magically blanked out, and it looked mostly like Zach was deliberately blanking his thoughts or just plain not thinking of anything. If Zach tried to embed a few relevant thoughts in a larger stream of consciousness, the restriction would not only unerringly pick out the offending parts, It would do its best to quietly erase them without leaving any suspicious pauses or other evidence of tampering. Unless someone spent a lot of time scrutinizing Zach's thoughts or already knew what to look for, it would be very easy to overlook the fact that some of the thoughts had been tampered with. How was the contract even doing that? Zorian had no idea how something like that could get accomplished without the contract itself being sapient in some fashion. But that couldn't really be true, right? What if I tried to read your memories? Zorian asked. No. Zach immediately and reflexively protested. He stared at him for a second before shaking his head, seemingly reasserting control over himself in that one moment. No. Bad idea. Zorian nodded slowly, making a placating gesture. All right, he said carefully. But you know, someone has already read your mind once. As well as erased a bunch of things in it. Red robe, Zach nodded. Yes, Zorian confirmed. Doesn't that make you murderous, I guess? Well, it kind of did, Zach said, scratching his hand. Remember when we first met and I told you I had a confrontation with Red Robe for the first couple of restarts after he disabled me and read my mind? I made it seem like he was the aggressor all the time and I was just an innocent victim, but I may have been simplifying things just a little bit. I basically made it my life's goal to destroy him for a while there. I hounded him relentlessly for at least 2 restarts. It may have been one of the reasons why he decided to leave the time loop entirely after a while. Oh, said Zorian. That made a lot of sense actually. But you were both time travelers. What would you even do to him if you managed to catch him? You don't need to be a mastermind mage to erase the victim's entire mind, Zach told him. Or scramble it beyond all repair. There are spells for that and I got a hold of all kinds of illegal spells while looping. You got me there, Zorian admitted. The sort of effect Zach was describing did not take much skill and sophistication. Just power. I notice you aren't frothing at the mouth right now at the thought of Red Robe being present again, though. Does the effect run out or something? Yeah, I calmed down after a while since I could no longer find him, Zach said with a shrug. Even after I left the time loop and saw Red Robe again, it didn't start up again. I guess the angels didn't want me to become useless if someone read my mind and then fled beyond my reach. So I should have just forcibly read your mind and then spent a few restarts running away from you? Zorian mused. Zach scowled at him. What? You have to admit that's a reasonable interpretation of what is happening, Zorian said. Except that he was not at all sure he could have successfully evaded Zach for several restarts. His fellow time traveler had vastly more endurance than Zorian did, and knew most of the places and escape routes Zorian could come up with. Zorian might have still been able to avoid any permanent consequences of being caught if he forced a restart every time he was forced into a corner, but doing so would rapidly burn through their remaining restarts. Anyway, what about the first time Red Robe messed with your mind? Zorian asked. You know, the one where he erased Vaers out of your mind and gods know what else? I don't know, Zach said, frowning. I don't recall going on that kind of hunt for someone before we met. I guess since I had no idea who mind raped me and perhaps didn't even know there was a specific person behind my amnesia, the effect never kicked in. Zorian mused. So if you never find out that you had your memory read or never see your attacker, it won't work. I'm no longer the same person I was back then. I will know I had my mind tampered with and I'll know it was you, Zach warned him. And not just because you just stupidly clued me in that you're considering it either. I mean, who else but you could pull it off? Even if I had absolutely no proof, my first instinct would be to blame you. And then you'd try to kill me, Zorian guessed. That or erase your relevant memories, Zach said. But we both know how impractical that option is on a mind mage like yourself. In practice, yes, I'd have to kill you. So, the contract could mask Zach's surface thoughts to eliminate any mention of itself, but it couldn't do the same for his long-term memories for some reason. Thus, anyone who looked deep into Zach's memories had to be silenced, in whatever manner was practical. Who determines who has to be memory wiped and who has to die? Zorian asked. What do you mean? Zach asked. What if Ilsa read your memories? Zorian clarified with an example. Would you memory wipe her or kill her? Memory wipe her, Zach said immediately. Really? But she has some pretty advanced knowledge of mind magic under her belt, Zorian pointed out. She's possibly even better than Svim in that regard. Really? Zach said, surprised. Huh. I would have never guessed. I guess I would have to kill her in that case. Zorian stared at Zack for a second. He lied. Ilsa had no advanced knowledge of mind magic. She knew how to cast telepathy spells and that was it. Guess that answered his question. Zack was the one that made the decision. The contract may force him to act in certain ways, but it was Zack's perception that determined things. What? Zack asked. Nothing, Zorian said, shaking his head. Let's forget that then. There is something else I've been wondering. Silver Lake said you have to make sure the time loop stays a secret or you die, right? Right, Zack sighed. She did say that, didn't she? Of course, I can't really confirm or deny anything. But it's pretty much true, Zorian surmised. However, back in the time loop, I recall that you tried to convince pretty much everyone who would listen that the time loop was real. Or at least you told me you did so. Plus, you never had any issue with helping me convince people that the time loop was real. Well, yeah, I'm not compelled to keep it a secret, Zack shrugged. I can't talk to people about the mysterious rules that bind me, but everything else is fair game. I can tell people about the time loop just fine, I just have to keep in mind the potential consequences. And, while the time loop was still going on, those consequences were a non-issue, you know? Right. You only die if the knowledge of the time loop isn't contained in the real world when it actually matters. It doesn't matter how many people you tell inside the time loop because they'll never get out of there anyway, Zorian guessed. Or at least that was the idea probably. Keep in mind, I had no idea how the time loop worked back then, Zack said. I didn't know there was a real world and the time loop world or any other details that we figured out later. I wasn't lying to you when I said I don't remember how I got in the time loop and how it functions. Right. That was pretty terrible design by the angels. If they could make sure that the contract they made with Zack was impossible to forget by any means, why didn't they include some basic information there as well? Alanik apparently wasn't kidding when he said angels worked in mysterious ways. If you didn't know how the time loop works, how did you know when telling people about the time loop matters and when it doesn't? Zorian asked. Zack couldn't answer him, of course. That would mean he would reveal some of the information about his contract thing, and that was forbidden. Well, we have no real choice here, Zorian said. If you can't discuss these mysterious rules you are laboring under, and you don't even have a solid idea what they mean, we'll have to summon the angels for a talk. Zack gave him a surprised look. But you, he began. I'm not supposed to be here outside the time loop, yes, Zorian said, nodding. This was the primary reason they had been hesitating about contacting the angelic hierarchy, even though they had already suspected the angels were involved in the time loop. It was entirely possible that summoning an angel would just draw their attention to Zorian's existence and give them a chance to finish what the Guardian of the Threshold had already tried and failed to do. We'd be risking a lot, Zack said, frowning. No, I'm risking a lot, countered Zorian. And I'm willing to take the risk. We need to see if this contract of yours can be renegotiated, or at least find out what it actually entails. Zack gave it a brief thought, tapping his fingers against the beer glass in his hand. Well, it's not like I was looking forward to dying, Zack finally said. Though if the angels immediately smite you dead upon sight, don't come crying to me that I didn't warn you. I won't be doing anything at that point, being dead and all, Zorian blandly pointed out. Anyway, Silver Lake said you made a contract to stop Panic Seth from being released at the end of the month. If true, that suggests the angels care a lot about keeping Panic Seth in his prison. Killing me would interfere with that. Plus, silencing all the extra witnesses is impossible so long as Red Robe lives. Hopefully that will give them pause. Well, that all made perfect sense to Zorian, but it was obvious that the logic of angels was not the same as the logic of men. It wouldn't be too surprising if the summoned angel just ignored everything Zorian said and tried to kill him anyway. Would it be considered disrespectful if he sent a simulacrum instead of participating in the summoning personally? You really think there is a chance to renegotiate this? Zack asked, waving vaguely over his chest. It was unlikely. But hey, it was worth a try, right? The contract is probably divine magic, right? Zorian asked, ignoring the question for now. I don't actually know, Zack said uncertainly. It has to be. I mean, otherwise I would have managed to find it by now, right? The only piece of mortal magic I ever found embedded in my soul is the marker. Zorian shook his head. He was pretty sure the marker did not include any divine energies or mysterious rules in it. Because if it did, Zorian himself would have probably inherited them from Zack when he acquired his marker. It's probably a part of the soul stabilization frame that boosts your mana reserves, Zorian pointed out. The divine blessing and divine contract probably came together as a package deal. Zack winced slightly. Yes, I kind of guessed that too, he admitted. But that whole frame is incredibly complicated. It's hard to figure out where the blessing ends and the contract starts. Yes, that was pretty much how Zorian expected it to be. The blessing and contract were probably intertwined in a way that made it impossible to remove one and not the other. That way, even if Zack found a way to remove the contract, he would have to give up the mana boost that came along with it. An extra layer of security that would make just about anyone hesitate to tamper with the whole thing. After all, who would be willing to lose something as amazing as a divine blessing that doubles your mana reserves? Even if the angels agree to renegotiate, you'd probably have to give up your divine blessing, Zorian eventually said. Zack looked horrified at the thought but also a little bit resigned. He seemed to have expected something like that to be true. "Ah, man," he whined, finishing his entire beer glass in one desperate gulp before ordering another from a nearby waitress. "It's better than being dead," Zorian consoled him. "I don't know, man. How would you react if you had to give up half of your mana reserves tomorrow?" Zack asked him sullenly. Zorian blinked rapidly in surprise. That's right. Zack didn't even know his mana reserves were a result of a divine blessing until relatively recently. The current situation had persisted as far as he could remember. His mana reserves felt normal as they were right now, and reducing them probably felt no different than a crippling injury. "I'd be absolutely devastated, but it's still better than dying," he finally said, a little quieter this time. Zack gave him a cranky grunt and said nothing else in response. "How are we going to summon an angel anyway?" Zack eventually asked, calming down a little when he got his second glass of beer delivered to their table. Alanik can't summon an angel," Zorian said, shaking his head. "Only a few priests are capable of that, and he is not one of them. However, I happen to know someone in this very city who is capable of summoning angels, so it shouldn't be a problem. Though we might want to invite Alanik with us anyway." "Oh, who is it?" Zack asked curiously. "I don't remember anyone like that." "You wouldn't know her. I haven't really interacted with her ever since we teamed up," Zorian noted. "It's Kylie Quosi, a priestess in one of the semi-abandoned temples here in Cyoria. She is a bit of an obscure figure, but she's a capable mage and she knows quite a bit of interesting magic. For instance, she is one of the experts when it comes to forecasting the future through divinations, and she also knows how to establish contact with the angels. It didn't matter much in the time loop, since contact with the spiritual planes had been blocked there, but now..." "All right," Zack said after a second of thought. "Let's see what the heavenly bastards have to say." Break. It took them 3 days to arrange for the summoning to occur. It wasn't particularly difficult, but Kylie was understandably very suspicious about a couple of teenagers showing up on her doorstep and asking for her to summon an angel so they could talk to it. The fact that Zack and Zorian were in a hurry and were pushing for her to set up the ritual quickly did not help matters. Thankfully, after bringing in Alanik to vouch for them and explaining several times that Zack had been given some kind of mission by the angels that he had forgotten, made her reluctantly agree to their request. While this was going on, their other preparations continued. The Silent Doorway adepts had finally agreed to open a passage to Koth, and Zack and Zorian used it to quickly claim the Imperial Orb. They did not establish contact with Daimen for the moment. The original plan was to evacuate everyone to Koth the moment a gate there was established, but that plan was now looking a lot less practical than it used to be. Talking everyone into cooperating with their plan while keeping them ignorant about the time loop was impractical, to say the least. Zorian was still a little pissed off that Zack had never tried to stop him when they had been discussing doing that, even though he knew this was practically suicide on his part. But then again, the situation was kind of hopeless. How would they ever be able to contain the knowledge of the time loop when they had no control over Red Robe and he had very little reason to keep things a total secret? Not to mention the problem of Zorian himself. Princess was claimed as normal and bound to Zorian. Zack's situation was deemed too unstable to have Princess depend on him. They had no idea how the bond with Princess would interact with his mysterious rules, and whether its presence would make it more complicated to adjust the contract he had with the angels. Plus, if Zack was compelled to go on a rampage or something, it was best he didn't also have a loyal Hydra at his disposal as well. His current skills were a headache enough. Svim also joined their little group of time loop-aware individuals. They had already started talking to him before Zorian found out about the contract, so it was pointless to back off from him now, plus they could really use his help. Finally, the scheduled day of the summoning had arrived. Zack, Zorian, Alanik, and Svim came together to Kylie's temple, where they were greeted by Batak, the friendly green-haired priest that Zorian had met so long ago. Even though Zack and Zorian had been kind of rude and impatient these last few days, the young priest had never lost his temper around them and remained polite and helpful to the very end. He led them to the interior of the temple, which had been dramatically rearranged in the preparation for the summoning ritual. The chairs and furniture had all been shoved to the walls to make space in the center, and a complicated circular spell formula had been inscribed on the floor in blue paint. Kylie was not the only priest present inside. 8 more lower-ranking attendant priests had been brought in from elsewhere, and were currently scurrying around the modified main hall, double-checking the spell formula circle and making last-minute corrections. Additionally, there was a tall, male priest observing the proceedings with a cool, detached look on his face. His fancy blue robes, decorated in gold and silver, meant that he was someone pretty high in the triumvirate church hierarchy. He gave them a chilly, unfriendly look when they entered the hall, and then purposely ignored them. "This is more involved than I thought it would be," Zorian whispered to Batak. I don't think you really realize the sort of thing you started," Batak told him with a quiet, nervous chuckle. "Even in the triumvirate church, it is not every day you get to summon an angel for a talk. This is a big deal. It's especially a big deal when someone pulls as many strings as you did and does it all on such short notice. This has a lot of people sitting up and taking notice, I hear." Pulling strings? Zorian didn't remember doing that. He looked at Alanik, who noticed his look and gave him a small shrug. "You said it was important," Alanik said unrepentantly. "I agreed with you." They eventually retreated to the side and let Kylie and her fellow priests finish things. The preparations were lengthy, however, and Zorian couldn't help but wonder if all of this was really necessary. There were lots of chanting and arcane rituals being performed, such as burning of incense and ritualistic bell ringing. Very little of it resembled structured magic as Zorian understood it. That was interesting because as far as he knew, angels could be summoned through any old summoning spell. It was just a matter of knowing how to contact them properly and them actually deigning to answer the summons. Did all these little rituals count as proper contact procedure, or was this just empty tradition that the triumvirate church insisted on following? He didn't actually ask that question though. He had antagonized them enough recently with his request, and he knew from Alanik that the triumvirate church had some very scary resources to call upon when someone angered them enough. He wasn't in the time loop anymore. After what felt like an hour, the actual spellcasting began. Neither Zack nor Zorian had much experience with summoning spells, as they were useless and impossible to train inside the time loop, so the whole process was largely a mystery to them. All they saw was the circular spell formula on the floor lighting up with a soft glow and the air above it rippling like hot summer air. "We've decided to summon a low-ranking angel to start with," Batak explained to them in a low voice. He wasn't involved in the summoning and seemed to have been assigned as their guide and minder instead. "Even if it cannot help you, it will inform its superiors about the issue and they'll decide what to do about it from there." "That's fine," Zorian said. Low-ranking was fine. Less chance of it completely overpowering them that way. "Servant of the highest ones, I implore you to grace us with your presence," Kylie intoned solemnly. "We, the lowly children of the dust, have a need for your infinite wisdom and Jude-Urk." "Oh, this doesn't sound too good. What's happening?" Zack and Batak asked out loud at the same time. "The summoning is getting hijacked," the blue-robed priest said in a panicky voice. "I don't understand. We performed all the rites correctly. The demons shouldn't be able to." "It's not the demons," Kylie said firmly. She was calmer than the blue-robed priest, but her voice still trembled a little. "It's being hijacked by another angel. Someone high up in the angelic hierarchy has used their rights of seniority to substitute themselves with the angel we were trying to summon." She then winced and stumbled in place. The other priests followed her action soon after, some of them falling on their knees. It's too much," one of the attendant priests gasped. "We can't supply enough mana for this." In the center of the summoning circle, a vague fuzzy outline flickered in and out of existence. Every summoning spell had to incarnate the spirit being summoned into something. A shell, a vessel that would allow them exist in and interact with the material world. The more powerful the spirit, the fancier the vessel had to be to contain them and let them manifest their power. And thus, the more mana one had to pay to create an ectoplasmic shell suitable for them. The angel that had substituted itself into their summoning ritual was apparently very mana-hungry to summon. Before anyone could say anything, Zack pushed Batak aside and stepped up to the summoning circle. He observed the whole thing for a few seconds and then started pouring his vast mana reserves into the ritual. He may not have been familiar with summoning magic, but simply supplying power to the whole thing was not too difficult to figure out. Zorian, Alanik and Svim followed his example immediately afterwards. A few seconds later, Batak woke up from his initial daze and hurriedly joined them in trying to power the summoning. Zorian's mana reserves dipped dangerously low almost as soon as he started pouring mana into the summoning ritual. It wasn't by choice. The angel on the other side of the ritual was aggressively pulling on every available mana source to fuel its descent to the material plane. No wonder the priest had reacted like they did. Having one's mana reserves forcibly drained in such fashion wasn't lethal, but it wasn't a pleasant experience either. Finally, after everyone in the room had run dry of mana, the fuzzy ectoplasmic form in the center of the summoning circle condensed itself into a glowing white ball and then erupted into an explosion of fire. A brief moment of panic surged in Zorian's heart when he realized there was a wall of flames coming at them and that he was entirely out of mana and practically defenseless. Thankfully, the explosion of flames suddenly reversed itself before it reached them and collapsed into a writhing ball of fiery ectoplasm before suddenly sprouting black branches and metallic surfaces. Eventually, the angel's form stabilized and Zorian finally got his first look at an angel. It wasn't human-looking in the slightest. Most old, powerful spirits weren't, but somehow Zorian didn't expect an angel to look so strange. The angel was shaped like a black, floating, cross-shaped tree with 4 sets of branches and no roots. Or maybe it would be more accurate to imagine 4 trees that had their lower half cut off and were then glued together through their trunk into a cross-shaped pattern. The branches were leafless and burning orange eyes grew on them instead. The eyes were animated, constantly moving and taking in everything around the angel. Translucent orange flames enveloped the branches, coiling around them like a multitude of snakes and releasing crackling sounds reminiscent of real branches burning in flames. Floating behind the tree of eyes was a gently spinning ring of silvery metal. The ring was densely covered in tiny golden characters that Zorian didn't recognize, and which seemed entirely alien to his eyes, unlike anything he had ever seen. Behind it, several ghostly ribbons of multicolored light extended in all directions from the angel, straining Zorian's eyes and blurring the angel's form. If one squinted and tilted their head the right way, they kind of looked like 6 pairs of wings. Zorian felt some of the eyes swivel in his direction, and he suddenly felt naked and exposed. It was as if the angel's eyes had seen right through him and peered straight into the depths of his soul, observing, analyzing, judging. Zorian instinctively took a step back from the angel, and then suddenly realized the entire hall was unnaturally quiet and still. Only he, Zack, and the angel remained in the hall. Everyone else was just gone. Zorian was getting uncomfortable flashbacks to his first meeting with Panikseth. "Do not be afraid," the angel said. Its voice was booming and resonated painfully in Zorian's ears and chest. "I have come to help." "What? Where is everyone?" Zack asked in confusion. "They should not hear this," the angel responded. "So you just shunted us off to some private space?" Zack frowned. "Also, can't you talk a little more quietly? My time here is limited," the angel cautioned. It made no attempt to lower its voice for them. It was still uncomfortably loud and resonant, and Zorian thought he could faintly hear additional voices repeating its words whenever it spoke. "You must not waste time." Zorian supposed the angel had a point there. Even though it had taken all their mana, a spirit of this level probably couldn't stay manifested on the material plane for very long. They had to make the most of it. "Did Zack enter into a contract with you?" Zorian asked. "Yes," the angel immediately confirmed. Zorian waited for a second, but the angel seemed disinclined to clarify more than that. "My enemies made me completely forget about that," Zack said with a frown. "They did not," the angel countered. Zack made a strange face. "Yes, they did," he said, laughing in a frustrated manner. "Why would I lie about it to you of all people? They did not make you forget because you never even knew you had made a contract with us," the angel said. If they do know that you have made a contract with us, it is because they have guessed correctly. Zack? Never knew he'd made a contract with you? Zorian asked incredulously. How would that work? We went through a great deal of effort to mask our involvement, the angel said. Our current interference is already overstepping certain boundaries that we would rather not cross. It would have been best for everyone if nobody had realized we had a hand in this. But how would I make a contract with you without realizing it? Zack insisted. That doesn't make any sense. We contacted you through a dream, the angel told him. You had no idea who was making the offer when you accepted the contract. Zack's face went through several different expressions as he processed that. Zorian just buried his face into his palms and took a deep breath. That's slander. Zack protested. I'd never do something stupid like that. Even I know it's dumb as hell to accept spiritual contracts from mysterious people that contact you in your dreams. You being foolish enough to take the offer was one of the reasons we chose you as our champion, the angel told him bluntly. Well, Zack fumbled. You know what? Forget it. Even if what you say is true, I still ended up mind-wiped of critical information inside the time loop. I didn't even know how to return to the real world. You included so many things in this contract I made with you, so why didn't you include some basic information like that in there as well? Didn't you include some basic information like that in there as well? We did, the angel responded. You simply never satisfied the conditions necessary to access the information. What? Demanded Zack. What do you mean by that? You had a goal, did you not? The angel challenged. You had to stop the invasion without informing anyone about the time loop. Had you ever succeeded at that, the contract would have given you information about the time loop and how to leave it. You never explained to him how the time loop worked to begin with, Zorian realized. Giving him the exit method right from the start would mean he could leave at any point he wished, even before he was capable of stopping Panic-Seth's release the way you wanted him to. The hearts of men are weak and fall easily to temptation, the angel confirmed. If he could not handle the relentless weathering of time and become the savior we need, it would have been better for him to never emerge from the Sovereign Gate at all. Zack began. You chose this, the angel reminded him, completely unrepentant. And with that in mind, I would like an explanation. What happened in there? You don't know? Zorian asked curiously. Would I be asking if I did? The angel asked rhetorically. The inner workings of the Sovereign Gate are opaque to us. Much like the black rooms you are familiar with, the Sovereign Gate is completely isolated from the rest of the world once activated. We have inferred some things, but we would like an unambiguous answer. Zack and Zorian gave the angel a quick summary of what had occurred inside the time loop, taking pains to emphasize Panic-Seth's interference with the normal operation of the time loop and how Red Robe's and Silver Lake's presence in the real world made the entire task of stopping the invasion very difficult. Finally, they explained Zorian's situation and how his presence made the idea of eliminating all knowledge of the time loop outside of Zack basically impossible. A disappointing result, the angel concluded. The task we gave you was not that difficult. Why did you allow things to get so complicated? Not that difficult. Zack repeated incredulously. Do you know how difficult it is to stop an army on your lonesome without being able to explain to people where your skills come from or how you know things? Even though we initiated the Sovereign Gate prematurely, you still had hundreds of chances to get things right, the angel said. I suspect you have a skewed perspective on the difficulty of the problem. In the original scenario, you would have been tackling an unaware force oblivious to your shifting schemes. Even with our restrictions, it should not have been difficult to figure out a solution when you have infinite attempts and your enemy never learns from your mistakes. Instead, you have been competing against a rival time looper. Regardless of how it happened, that is your own failing, not ours. Zack looked like he was about to start yelling at the angel, but eventually restrained himself. He scoffed disdainfully at the spirit, and then folded his hands over his chest in silence. They didn't actually know how Red Robe got included as a time looper, so it was difficult to counter the angel's claims there. So you deliberately activated the Sovereign Gate a month before the invasion, Zorian noted. You could tell what was going to happen a month in advance? The future is hazy and constantly changing, but some things are more certain than others, the angel said. Unless something was done, Panic-Seth's release was practically set in stone. Why not just inform the Triumvirate Church and let them handle it? Zorian asked. Strange as this may sound to you, that would have been far worse than what we ended up doing, the angel responded. We are not supposed to meddle in mortal conflicts. Why me? Zack suddenly asked. If you have such an accurate way of predicting the future, surely you knew I wasn't a good choice. On the contrary, the angel disagreed. You were the best choice. That is why we settled on you in the end. Best how? Zack asked suspiciously. It is a secret, the angel responded. There were considerable restrictions in regards to candidates. They had to begin the month in Scioria. They needed to have a certain potential and mentality. They needed to have considerable freedom of movement and association. They needed to satisfy the ethical guidelines. And so much more. I cannot tell you the details. If Zorian began the month in Scioria, would he also be a candidate? Zack asked. Zorian gave him a strange look. Why would he ask that? Heavens no, the angel said. He fails just about every criterion, especially in regards to mentality. I am surprised he was even willing to risk his life in this manner, based on his previous actions and attitudes. Annoyingly, Zack seemed really pleased to hear that response. Zorian folded his arms over his chest in dissatisfaction. Jerks, the both of them. What is my status at the moment, then? Zorian asked. I defied the laws of the time loop and got out into the real world, but I notice you are not making a move against me. Are you fine with my presence, then? The angel's burning eyes focused on him more closely, studying him in great detail for a couple of seconds. Zorian squirmed uncomfortably under its gaze, but stood his ground and stubbornly kept staring back at the angel without flinching. You are a forbidden existence and you have committed grave sins to be where you are right now, the angel judged. However, we are not without mercy and understanding. So long as the primordial's release is stopped in the end, we are willing to overlook some things. So, I'm safe from your wrath. Zorian summarized. If the primordial remains chained by the end of the month, the angel stressed. If not, then we will be forced to directly intervene in the material world. At that point, it costs us nothing to be extra thorough and eliminate all possible complications. You understand, yes? Of course, Zorian confirmed. Even though he had made no contract with the angels, his life also depended on the outcome of the invasion. If he and Zack failed to stop Red Robe and Silver Lake from releasing Panicseth, the angels would take care of him all the same. If you're fine with Zorian, does that mean that my contract can be renegotiated now? Zack asked hopefully. Because the way things are now, we cannot renegotiate the contract, the angel said. It simply cannot be done. But you're the one who made it, Zack protested. Why wouldn't you be able to change it? It is divine magic, the angel pointed out. We obviously didn't make it. Of course. No one could cast divine magic in the current age, not even the angels. Only the gods themselves were capable of that. Everyone else, including their spiritual servants, were just tapping into artifacts and resources left behind when the gods went silent. How about just removing it? Zorian tried. Also not possible, the angel responded. It is deliberately designed to be next to impossible to remove once placed. I am afraid there is nothing we can do about it. But the way things are going, I'll die at the end of the month even if I stop the primordial from getting out, Zack pointed out. Isn't that just a little unfair? It's obvious the situation has changed from the time I agreed to the contract. And even you admitted the way you got me to agree to it was kind of dodgy and inappropriate. We cannot absolve you of fulfilling your part of the bargain, the angel stubbornly said. It simply is not within our power to do so. The only thing I can promise you is that if you find the way to remove or evade the contract in some fashion, we will not seek to punish you for it. Zack's eyes widened at the statement. You will not seek to, you're saying if I found a way to trick the contract on my own, you would have gone after me for it? He asked incredulously. We are not the primordials, the angel told him. Though our actions are restricted, we are far from powerless in regards to the material world. Even if you could trick the spell left by the gods, it would do no good if we were also not willing to look the other way and accept this outcome. You made a solemn pact with us and we have done our side of the bargain. We have every right to be harsh and demand that you fulfill your obligation to the letter. But as I said to your friend, we are not without mercy and understanding. So long as the primordial's release is stopped in the end, We are willing to overlook some things. So I still have to do the impossible, complained Zack. It's just that if I succeed at that, you won't come after me in response. You can view it that way, I suppose, the angel responded. The spirit froze for a moment, its eyes staring off somewhere into the distance, as if listening to some distant words that neither Zack nor Zorian could hear. My time here grows short. If you have anything else you need of me, say it quickly. Give me the actual contents of the contract Zack signed with you, Zorian demanded. Zack can't tell me what it says and I need to know. For a while the angel said nothing. Then its branches swayed on unseen winds for a few seconds, and a ray of burning orange light erupted without warning and struck Zack in the chest. Rather than harming him, however, the ray harmlessly sank into his chest and was absorbed without a trace. Before either Zack or Zorian could ask what the hell that was about, a series of burning letters started materializing in the air in front of Zack. And kept going, and going, and going. Pages and pages of text, going on and on and on about what was expected of Zack. Zorian expected the contract to be a couple of concise sentences, since that was what a Heia spell would look like. But apparently he was wrong. The contract instead consisted of a massive legal document, complete with that peculiar legal word choice that made official documents hard to understand even if you speak the language. It was good that he could flawlessly memorize everything he could see, because there was no way he could understand this thing without a few hours to pore over it. And possibly some actual legal help. For heaven's sake, Zack, Zorian sighed. How the hell could you agree to this? There is no way you actually read all this and understood its implications. I don't remember any of it. Zack protested. It was my stupid younger self, okay? Gods know your younger self was just as stupid in his own way. Well, he got him there, but still. This was something else. He did not actually read the contract, the angel added in helpfully. Still, we had summarized the relevant parts to him. He has to stop the invasion of Cyoria from achieving its goal, or he will die at the end of the month. He cannot let anyone know about the existence of the time loop, or he'll die at the end of the month. He cannot kill a ruler of any nation, or otherwise directly cause a nation to collapse into anarchy, or he'll die at the end of the month. Restrictions were placed on what kind of mind and soul magic he can learn, because the ethical committee would not approve the project otherwise. He is also completely forbidden from talking about the specifics of the contract he signed. Anyone who forcibly sees the contents of the contract, such as through a deep memory scan, must be neutralized in whatever manner is practical. Finally, the contract is completely dissolved at the end of the month, allowing him to live life freely from that point afterwards. Can you tell me how you defined knows about the time loop? Zorian asked. It is all in the contract, the angel responded, one of its branches casually waving towards Zack. I know you memorized it. The angel once again stilled for a moment, seemingly listening to something in the distance. I must go, it said. You have one more question. If the primordial becomes free, is it the end of the world as we know it? Zack immediately asked, giving no chance for Zorian to think about this last chance to question the spirit. Probably not, the angel admitted. Nevertheless, you still would not want this to happen, and not just because of the dire consequences for you personally. The highest ones had placed a great many triggers into the core that governs this world. If conditions satisfying a trigger are detected, automatic countermeasures are initiated. A primordial gaining access to the material plane would activate several of them. You do not want that to happen. No one wants that to happen. Much of our duties involve making sure none of the triggers can be activated, for the sake of both the spirit world and the material one. Most of the triggers look out for things the highest ones had considered existential threats, and they had a very scorched earth policy when dealing with existential threats. Having said that, the angel suddenly swooped down towards the ground, and one of its branches lightly reached towards the stone floor beneath them. Even though its branches looked thin and fragile, they scooped out a chunk of stone from the floor like it was nothing but wet clay, and then started shaping it just as easily. Black branches twisted and tapped the stone like hundreds of tiny fingers, chipping off pieces in a flurry of rapid movement. In less than 3 seconds, the chunk of rock became a smooth, glossy cube that was then thrust directly into Zorian's hands. It was the weirdest thing because it didn't look like magic. Instead, it looked as if the angel physically shaped the chunk of stone through a combination of inhuman strength, speed, and precision. Take this, the angel said. Use it to summon me for the final battle. How do you know there will be a final battle? Asked Zorian. The future is hazy and constantly changing, but some things are more certain than others, the angel said, echoing one of its earlier statements. And then it was gone and the temple hall was once again loud and full of people. Alanik, Svim, Batak, Kylie and the other priests quickly surrounded them, demanding to know what had occurred. From their perspective they just suddenly disappeared for a while and now they are mysterious back. Zack and Zorian ignored them for a moment, focusing on the cube in Zorian's hands. It wasn't as smooth as Zorian originally thought it was. It was densely covered with strange writing. The same kind of writing that covered the silver ring that floated behind the angel. There was nothing obviously magical about it, but the cube had a strange sheen to it when the light hit it just right and the characters did seem to have some kind of pattern to them. In the end he carefully pocketed the cube and put it out of his mind for the moment. Before he dived into the specifics of Zack's contract and studied the cube, they had one more meeting to go through. Red Robe had invited them for a talk. Break. As Red Robe had noted in his brief letter to them, Zack and Zorian already knew how to contact him with information about the meeting. Their simulacrums clashed all the time, and it was no problem to just throw a letter on the ground during one of those confrontations and then just walk away. Using that method, Zack and Zorian eventually arranged for a meeting with Red Robe on the roof of one of the academy buildings. It was a sufficiently public location that neither side could really prepare a trap for the other there. Plus, the academy wards were actually pretty good now that Zack and Zorian covertly talked them into changing their ward keys. Even Zack and Zorian had to be a little careful around them, since the new security voided their knowledge as much as it did Red Robe's. The meeting was arranged at midnight and everyone arrived exactly on time. One side consisted of Zack, Zorian, Svim and Alanik. The other had Red Robe, Silverlake and Quatakikal. Red Robe was wearing his usual red robe as a disguise, his face hidden in a patch of darkness behind the hood. Silverlake was as Zorian last saw her, a young, attractive woman wearing a form-fitting dress. She seemed very happy and pleased with herself, grinning from ear to ear as she looked at them, a fact that made Zack obviously fume at her. It just made her grin wider. And then there was Quatakikal. He was not in his skeletal form for this meeting, opting to come in his human guise instead. He looked calm, composed and confident. He greeted them politely with a small bow before turning silent and just observing things. Zorian sighed inwardly. He knew it was a futile dream, but he had been hoping Red Robe and Silverlake hadn't initiated the old Lich into their deep secrets. This made everything so much harder. Ha ha. Silverlake cackled. See, I told you they would bring those two with them and none other. Pay up. We never actually agreed to any bets, Red Robe protested. Bah. You're supposed to play along for appearance's sake. Silverlake said, scowling at him. Whatever. Zorian, did you reconsider my offer? It still stands, you know. Shut up, Red Robe snapped at her. Everyone, I'd like to apologize for her actions recently. I know you probably think I sent her to sow dissent into your group, but that was entirely her own idea. She seems to think there is a genuine chance of convincing Mr. Kaczynski to join us in freeing the Primordial, but we all know that is just a fantasy. Yeah, as if Zorian was going to believe that. He fully believed that Silverlake being there was an attempt to make Zorian and Zack fight amongst each other. He also suspected it was an attempt by Red Robe and Silverlake to reduce the number of enemies lined up against them, since Zorian was far less likely to keep telling people about the time loop if he knew that would get Zack killed. Which was what ended up happening in the end. One thing he didn't believe for a moment was the idea that Silverlake actually made an honest offer for him to join her. Her natural instinct was to exploit others, not work with them. As if your plan is any better, Silverlake complained. Why do you think? I thought we agreed I'll be doing the talking? Red Robe protested with a sigh. Silverlake clacked her tongue dismissively and then conjured herself a chair to sit on. Quatakikal did not react at all to his companion's antics, opting to study Zorian and his group instead. A short and very uncomfortably silence descended on the scene. Everyone involved was tense and seemed to be ready to attack at a moment's notice. Even Silverlake, who was sitting on a conjured chair and tried to give off an impression of being bored and inattentive, was clearly twitching whenever someone made an unexpected move. What is this all about? Zack finally asked. You're the one who invited us here, so why are you silent all of a sudden? Don't waste our time. Even after all this time you still haven't changed. Still so impatient. Red Robe said softly as if reminiscing about something. Zack frowned at him, clearly considering the merits of just starting a battle here and now. I see you came here unmasked, Red Robe commented. You already know who we are, Zack shrugged. Is there any point in hiding our faces? True, Red Robe nodded. Well, I guess there's no point in hiding my identity any longer either. He pulled his hood down and the patch of darkness that hid his face suddenly disappeared. It was Veyers. The same face, the same blonde hair, the same orange, slitted eyes. The main difference was that his hair was well-groomed, his eyes lacked some of that ferocity and violence he had seen in Veyers recently, and his entire attitude was calm and more assured. I'm guessing this isn't much of a surprise to you, Red Robe said. Without the voice-masking spells embedded into the hood of his robe, even his voice was recognizably that of Veyers. Just calmer and quieter. Still, I hope you take this gesture of goodwill as just that. I'm not the monster you think I am, and I really think we can come to a sort of agreement here. Zorian studied the boy in front of him for a few seconds before shaking his head. You say it's a gesture of goodwill and you show us a fake face and identity, Zorian told him. How do you expect us to agree to anything when you open the talks with such a brazen deception? Veyers looked honestly taken aback at the accusation. You're overthinking things, Silverlake said, rolling her eyes at him. It's really him. Who else could it be really? No, he's not Veyers, Zorian insisted. It never made sense and still doesn't. Zack sent Zorian an almost imperceptible frown. He clearly didn't understand why Zorian was so certain, but didn't want to call him on it. Zorian didn't blame him. He had long had his suspicions, but it was only when he saw the true form of Zack's angelic contract that he became completely certain. Are you asking me to prove that I'm Veyers? Red Robe said with an amused laugh. What would even satisfy you? Every student has to give their mana signature to the Academy for identification purposes, Svim suddenly said, reaching into his jacket pocket and retrieving an inconspicuous-looking ball out of it. He displayed it for everyone to see. Proving whether or not you're Veyers should be an extremely simple matter. Red Robe stared at the ball for a few seconds before bursting into short, barking laughter. Oh hell, he said, chuckling to himself. I can't believe I overlooked something as simple as that. Silverlake gave him a shocked look. Feeling dumb now? Red Robe said, giving her a contemptuous look. You spent all these days interacting with me and never suspected a thing, but Mr. Kaczynski here saw through it immediately. Maybe you should have asked to join him instead. He then ignored her and turned to face Zorian fully. I guess you also know who I really am? He asked, tilting his head to the side with a self-indulgent smile. You're Jornak, Veyers' lawyer friend, Zorian said. I'm guessing Veyers introduced you to Zack and you hit it off with each other since you have both been cheated out of your inheritance and empathized with each other because of it. He didn't realize you have ties to the esoteric order of the Celestial Dragon until it was too late. The cult of the dragon is nothing to me, Red Robe said. He still continued wearing Veyers' face. I was never seriously loyal to them even before the time loop. So why? Zack asked him, looking at him with confused eyes. If Zorian could trick the time loop into letting him leave, then you don't understand, Red Robe said, shaking his head sadly. You just wouldn't understand no matter how I tried to convince you. This knowledge, this power, it's just begging to be used. Shudratrana changed the world entirely when he left the time loop. Why can't I? Why couldn't we? Zack seemed taken aback at the question. Have you two ever tried to look into what our country has been doing these past few years? Red Robe said, looking at Zorian. I just wanted to figure out how to ensure justice for me and Zack at first. However, I couldn't stop myself from looking, and the more I looked, the more awful things I found. The prosperity we enjoy right now is all built atop of a mountain of lies, theft, unspeakable corruption, and even straight-up murder. Even if I got justice for myself and Zack, it's all just a drop in the bucket. The other countries are no better, Olenek pointed out. Yes, I know that. Red Robe said, agreeing vigorously. I've looked into them as well and it was just as disgusting. And, even if one wanted to shut their eyes and ignore all the violations, the current state of peace is just a fragile illusion. Another round of splinter wars will occur soon with all the pain and suffering that entails. Something had to be done. I had to do something. But Zack wouldn't hear any of it. He just wanted to stop the invasion, get the money his caretaker had taken from him and look away from the ugliness of the world. We had this incredible opportunity to change things for the better, and he was fine letting it slip through his fingers. I hate to break it to you, but you're trying to raise an entire city of 500,000 people to the ground and feed their souls to a wraith creation machine, Zack told him. If that's your vision of changing things for the better, I'm not surprised my forgotten self would have none of it. Things wouldn't have been so drastic if you had agreed to work with me on this, Red Robe said. Though yes, some unpleasantness would still have to get done. Things have to get worse before they get better. There was a short pause as everyone processed Red Robe's Jornak's statements. Jornak decided to take this chance to drop his disguise and assume his real form. He took a deep breath and then suddenly became taller, his facial structure shifting and changing. A few seconds later, Vaers was gone. In his place was a perfect copy of Jornak as Zorian remembered him. Except that there was a spark of intensity in this Jornak's eyes which simply hadn't existed in him the last time they had spoken. The Jornak that Zorian had known was a nervous, risk-averse man that harbored no desire to change the world or enact some grand scheme. Zorian knew this because he had read his thoughts and memories several times, and had seen nothing particularly suspicious about them. Then again, wasn't Zorian the same? This was just one more proof that the time loop was capable of radically changing a person. For better or for worse. Of course, this could all just be another disguise. But Zorian rather doubted it. He was pretty sure Red Robe really was Jornak. That's why Vaers had to be soul-killed in the time loop and erased out of Zack's mind. Because Vaers would know if Jornak was acting inconsistently from restart to restart. And Vaers always crashed their first classes of the year and could thus interact with Zack at any time. If Zack regularly spoke to Vaers over the course of many restarts, the other boy would surely mention how his best friend Jornak was missing from his house or doing strange things that differed radically from restart to restart. In order for Jornak to drop off Zack's perception, Vaers had to go away. You know what? Why don't you just tell us why you invited us here? Zack suddenly told Jornak. Surely it isn't to get us to join you, right? No, I know this is impossible, Jornak said. In the end, neither of you are willing to dirty your hands with this, even if doing so would prevent far more suffering in the end. No, I invited you here to arrange for a truce. A truce? Zorian asked incredulously. Yes. I want us to stop fighting until the day of the summer festival, Jornak clarified. We'll decide a winner and loser among us in one massive battle at the end of the month, just like it was always meant to be. In the meantime, you'll stop making raids on our forces and we'll make no moves against you. That seems like a deal that completely favors you, Zorian pointed out. Why would we shoot ourselves in the foot by agreeing to this? Jornak smiled at the question and took out a brown stone with a crudely carved flame symbol on it. It didn't seem magical in the slightest and Zorian did not recognize it, but Zack immediately paled upon sighting it. Because I have wraith bombs scattered throughout the major cities on the continent, ready to activate at my command. Because I know exactly who to assassinate and how in order to immediately trigger a new continental war. And, he shook his stone token as he said this, because I got Oganj and his group to work with me. Your choice.